You're seeing my face for the second time and hopefully for the last time today. So bear with that. So this session sort of builds on the session we had at 9 o'clock. So it basically tries to think of ways in which we can include marginalized groups in our societies, as well as their access to social protection. So we have up to 12:30 with the leverage of just 5 minutes to have this session. And we want to try and stick to that. So with me are these ladies you see up front here, and they will be speaking to the issues of marginalized groups, particularly migrants and refugees in general, and refugee women in particular. So Grace will actually speak on migrant workers, and Grace is an executive director of the Platform for Labor Action, where she is responsible for managing the organization and for change management. This platform is a national civil society organization that was founded in 2000. And since then, Grace has been an advocate for the promotion of workers as well as their rights. Then I'll also have Danita. Danita will focus her presentation on the child support grant for refugee women in South Africa. And she comes from, an academic world at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where she's a lecturer at the Community and Development Studies. And she is sort of an advocate towards addressing social injustices. Then lastly, I'll have Kalitani, who looks at the urban refugees in Uganda. And Kalitani is a human rights attorney at the Refugees Law Project. Also, she comes from the academic setup at the School of Law in Makerere University. So she says she strives to ensure that forced migrants and their host communities enjoy their human rights and lead dignified lives. So let me have Grace, Danita, and Kalitani in that order, sharing with us their research and experiences. Your time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm presenting on the topic of the migrant worker will return to poverty, a study of Uganda's social protection coverage. you find that the search for what has come to be commonly known as greener pastures continues to surge, especially in this era of COVID-19. And several people have continued to move from developing countries to developed or middle income countries. The entire exodus is characterized by the need to make life better. And you will know that it's a common belief among the people who leave their countries to go work elsewhere, that they will find their way back home, either to bring the persons, their colleagues they left behind, or to send them some financial support. However, at times, many migrant workers have found either they've been forced to return to their home countries because their contract either expired, or they were the option of either looking for another opportunities. Others have acquired permanent residences in the countries where they went to work. And of course, those that return home are mainly exposed to the economic vulnerabilities that affect their livelihood due to the lack of social protection in their home countries. Despite their making many remittances, and also these remittances benefit their home countries, the migrant worker will return to the same conditions they left behind. And this you find that once again, they embrace the poverty. And this paper, whereas it's Uganda inclusively, it also can be any other developing country. You find that they've had little impact in as far as enabling their migrant labor being protected during and after employment period when they return. The paper will examine Ugandan migrant work as a person who leave the country to go and work. It focused mainly on these that have moved to the Middle East, mainly Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, among other countries, in hopes of finding better resources. You'll find that, yes, I'm aware that the host countries where these persons migrate have access to social security. So this paper does not seek to discredit that position. However, it argues that social protection at the point of the migrant worker returning home is what it's all about. For Uganda's case, you find that social protection, like Jonathan already noted, has evolved over time. And the Uganda's Vision 2040 underscores the importance of social protection that addresses risks and vulnerabilities, and also looking at age, social class, looking at the disability, among others. The vision also envisages that social protection system includes a universal pension system for the elderly, for public works, among others. So you find that we have the National Social Protection Policy that looks at children even with disability. It encloses all these persons, and also it identifies that the universal health insurance will be one of the key strategies for alleviating the high costs of health care by household, enabling access to affordable health care for all. And also at a national level, we have the National Development Plans. We've had National Development Plan 1, 2, now we're at 3, and they all highlight social protection as one of the key strategies for transforming Uganda from a peasantry society to a modern or prosperous country. And when you look at social protection mechanisms in the country, Uganda has intervention. We have several, the public service pension schemes, the National Social Security Scheme, which is NSSF, which caters for people in employment in the private sector. We have that for government workers. There are different social protection schemes like the community-based rehabilitation program for persons with disability, the feeding programs in school. There are several things which are fragmented, but which are there providing social protection system, but these are always or have been limited in scope as well as coverage, and they are not coordinated under unified policy framework. And also, unfortunately, when you look at a deeper analysis of the practice and trends, like we had yesterday, social protection has been viewed by the government as a donation to the extreme poor, meaning because it's not viewed as an investment, it's seen as a burden, and the interventions are short of covering migrant workers leaving Uganda, because our laws assume that when the migrant workers leave the country, the host countries where they are treating them fairly, which is the ideal position. Much as the NSSF accords many people who come to work within Uganda, it does not reflect the same provisions for the intra-country social protection remittances. When you see Ugandans working elsewhere, sending in, they don't have social provision, social security provisions when they return. I'll look at the legal framework. The principal law that governs migration in Uganda is the Citizenship and Immigration Control Act, which was set in 1999. But you'll find that it regulates the entry and residence of migrants in Uganda, as well as the issuance of citizenship, but it does not govern immigration or returnee migration. And even when Uganda went ahead and ratified the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of the rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, it did not make any revisions to this standard law to ensure, or principal law, to ensure that the returnee migrants are included. Of course, upon desiring to enter into the global labor markets, Uganda put in place it put in place the regulations that govern external recruitment of labor, which is the Employment Recruitment of Ugandan Migrant Workers Abroad Regulations 2005. This seeks to promote full employment and equity of and the quality of employment opportunities for all, and to ensure that when Ugandans choose to work abroad, their rights are protected. However, you find that it mainly looks at the processes. How do the recruitment agency get licensed? How do the processes, the startup capital? But it does, unfortunately, they refer more to the recruitment agencies than to the worker or the persons who are to be externalized. So the protection they offer is limited, thus leaving majority of the migrant workers in case of disputes at the whim and wishes of those who employ them. Then the migrant workers and social protection in Uganda, you'll find that the major issue in Uganda has been that they limited or inadequate statistics on the number of migrants. You'll find between 1990 and 2013, there was a 153% increment in the number of persons who leave the country to work elsewhere, and the majority left for better opportunities, mainly economics, to make money or to look for livelihoods. And there was a slight decrease between 2010 to 2012. You find during those periods, more women than men were migrating out of Uganda. And all these were mainly moving to the border states. Oh, okay, they were moving to border states and say Kenya, South Sudan, among others. And you find that all of these living, there was a limited or comprehensive law to deal with them in terms of what are they, how are they dealing to deal with the migration, because what was in place was looking at those living, especially looking at the looking at the irregularities. So you find that in terms of the statistics, the ones who left by themselves without going through the clear channels were not captured. Also, you find that whereas we report that we have about 1.5 million Ugandans working abroad, in the national statistics, we have about 65,000 persons working away from Uganda, and there was an increment to 70,000 in 2016. However, the recent data states that about more than 100,000 persons working away from Uganda. But these are looking at the people who are within the systems, because when there was a national health survey, you find that they were over, I need 2 more minutes, Jane. 2 more minutes, because I haven't even gone into whatever I talked too much. You find that there were over 42% persons among the populations in Uganda. They were reporting, 42% were reporting that they have relatives living abroad, meaning over 3 million persons are working abroad. Then I'll go into the policy gaps. Of course, it's the inadequate data, the low policy formation or coordination. We have 3 ministries which are responsible for migration. That is Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. In Uganda, we have the Internal Affairs and the Foreign Affairs. But social protection is not core of their policy statements. And also, I will make now the policy recommendation. One would be updating the legal framework, whereby we'll have compulsory contribution of the recruitment agencies taking these persons to make sure they contribute to social security, so that upon their return, there is something they find. Then also encouraging or making awareness of our voluntary social security contribution, which is provided for in the law, and it's not yet taken advantage of due to inadequacy in information, and also developing a comprehensive migration policy, because the government is in the process of drafting one. However, there is need to engage the private sector to ensure that the views are taken in, and also that even migrant workers' issues are taken into consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, everyone, and to those joining us virtually, good morning to you too. My topic today will be looking at removing the barriers to the child support grants for refugee women in South Africa, and also looking at the local experiences in addition to learning from international experiences. And for this research, I focused on refugee migrant women from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, to ground this research in some policy context, well, the refugee socioeconomic rights are protected by the Refugee Act of 1998, which stipulates that refugees qualify for most of the social grants that are dispersed to their South African counterparts. And this piece of legislation is actually considered one of the most progressive refugee legislation worldwide, because there's actually a piece of law that ensures that the state funds can actually provide adequate social protection for displaced migrants in the country. And as Nokwanda mentioned earlier in the previous session, the child support grant is the most distributed grant in South Africa. And despite its modest value of 440 Rand, it has played and continued to play a significant role in addressing the financial and social challenges in refugee households, especially in terms of refugee women empowerment and financial independence, and aiding them to fulfill their roles as primary caregivers. Now, South Africa is aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, in addition to its own National Development Plan for 2030, which aims to eliminate poverty and inequality, especially in terms of redressing the injustices faced by marginalized populations such as women and displaced migrants in South Africa. Now, given this context, the refugee policy framework has gone through markedly distinct shifts over the past 3 decades, namely predating 1990 as the first refugee policy stance. It was, markedly anti-human rights, given that it was under the apartheid regime. So the refugees who could seek asylum in South Africa were whites who were coming from the conflicts in neighboring countries like Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and they were able to integrate in South Africa and could access the social amenities that were provided by the apartheid state. Then came the 90s with the repealing of the apartheid laws, and South Africa now aligning to human rights and signing the UN Convention on the Status of Refugee. South Africa made concerted efforts to improve the rights of refugees regardless of their race or background. So this was ultimately marked in 1998 with the turning point of the Refugee Act of 1998, granting socioeconomic rights to refugees, and compared that to other African states whereby there's little to no social protection provided to refugees or even to their own citizens. And many refugees have to rely on, donations from faith-based organizations or international donors, as Dr. Dafuleya said earlier this morning. And then our third shift recently came in 2017, whereby South Africa is now taking more of a security approach to refugee and migration management. And this can be seen in the Refugee Amendment Act. Yes, further. Okay, so in terms of the Refugee Amendment Act, this has come under some scrutiny by many human rights activists who are saying that this is a violation of the human rights of refugees in South Africa because, for instance, their refugee status could be rescinded if they seek consular services at a diplomatic mission from their home country, engage in political activity, or apply for official documents that pertain to their home country. So, it kind of violates and contradicts their human rights, and also in terms of applying for socio-economic grants. Now, moving on to my research methodology, I employed a qualitative research whereby a focus group discussion took place with 4 refugee women in Durban. And the purpose of this discussion was to explore, to understand their experiences with accessing the CSGs and to explore how it can be improved and what barriers that they faced. Now, moving on to the findings, there were, mixed feelings concerning the CSG. They spoke about the positive impact it has had in empowering them as caregivers, namely in terms of ensuring that their kids can go to school, and it has contributed to school fees, and even in terms of learning outcomes, arithmetic, their arithmetic and the reading skills of their children has improved because they can attend school more regularly. Then in terms of reduction in child hunger, can you please move on to the second one? And yeah, reduction in child hunger as well, because now the CSG has aided them to purchase food items, ensuring that the children have enough to eat at home and at school. And then thirdly, the health outcomes as well. The CSG has aided them in accessing healthcare services in terms of transports to health facilities and pharmacies to purchase medication. Nevertheless, notwithstanding these, these positive outcomes, we've also seen that there has been some disparities between the policy and the implementation, and they talked about the barriers that they faced, even though they are recipients of the CSG. So firstly, refugees have to apply for the CSG after every 3 months. This is a policy introduced by the Department of Social Development in 2013. However, when they have to reapply for the CSG, there can be delays, and often there are delays, meaning that the children do not receive grants during that time that the paperwork is being processed. And secondly, and this also leads on to this first barrier, the second barrier is that of the poor coordination between the two departments responsible for delivering socioeconomic rights to refugees, namely the Department of Home Affairs and the Department of Social Development. They expressed the idea that SASA, which works with the DSD, can be selective in terms of disbursing grants to refugees. And there's often discrimination depending on which staff member you get. So these ladies highlighted that they have friends and family who have fled from Congo and sought refuge here, but then their children were denied the CSG. And something that they kind of lamented is that the money is not meant for them, but it's to raise the living standards of children who are actually born in South Africa. And then thirdly, they talked about this aspect of the legalities of changes to the Refugee Act. Oftentimes they do not even know what changes have been made, and they don't understand their rights and how to act within the law. And because of that, they feel that this law is actually a contradiction, because they need, for example, like official documents to apply for Social Security grants or to apply for a job. But if they were to do that, then it could be deemed as unlawful. So these are the various barriers. And the last one, the recent COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdown, that has also been a challenge for them in terms of accessing, the additional grants that was made available in the COVID-19 recovery package. One participant highlighted that she received the grant for 1 month, and when she attempted to contact SASA, they didn't assist her in terms of getting grants for the additional months that the additional 500 Rand was available to caregivers. Also, South African citizens who are recipients of grants, they received food parcels, but these women said that they could not access the food parcels. Now, all in all, considering these barriers, it does not come as a surprise that only a meager 0.3% of migrants' children are recipients of the child grants in South Africa. And a lot needs to be done. And first of all, the legality behind this. And we can look at the experience of Germany. So as you know, because of the Syrian crisis, Germany opened its borders to refugees from Syria. And when these refugees came, they also amended laws in terms of reducing the abuse of financial assistance to refugees. But however, this act or the amendment was repealed because the German government felt that this was anti-human rights because refugees were cramped in a small space. They were getting 40 euros per month, which is nothing considering the living standard in Germany. So again, I think South Africa can learn from this experience in implementing the law in a way that does not violate fundamental human rights. And then, of course, in terms of enhancing the human and technical capacity to support the integration of refugee and facilitating their access to rights. And lastly, I think just an overhaul of the system as a whole in terms of educating people on the rights of refugees, ensuring that the sectors of society know the format of refugee paperwork and documentation. And most importantly, just having empathy that anyone can be a refugee at any given time, and they should be afforded the same dignity that we all expect. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'll be talking about urban refugees and their plight in the face of COVID. Uganda as a country has been hailed for its progressive refugee policy. On the continent of Africa, Uganda hosts the largest number of refugees. At the moment, we are approximately 1.7 million refugees in Uganda. The method of accommodation that we have is open to both urban migrants as well as those that will stay within the settlements. But to this extent, once you choose to stay in the central or in the urban area, you are literally on your own. Support or assistance will only be extended to persons who are in the settlements, which begs the question is this fair at all? At the end of the day, the 1951 convention makes it open for you to choose where you stay and it should not limit or impact the kind of assistance that you attract. At the moment, May 2021, the statistics depicted 1.4 million refugees, and that makes 94% living in the settlement and 6% in the urban areas. I should be clear to note that when they say 6% in the urban area, it only means Kampala, the capital city. But we have refugee hosting districts that have cities and they have refugees, persons that have moved from the settlement and are in these cities, but they have not been documented as urban refugees. When it comes to social protection in Uganda, it is on mainly 4 pillars: labor markets, social assistance, social insurance, and social services. And they're all anchored in laws. So as far as social protection, Uganda has not accepted to be left behind. When you look at the legal framework, we have the laws, the policies, and the different programs that advance social protection. Under the laws, the primary law or the supreme law is the Constitution of the Republic. I don't think I should go into all these one by one, but this depicts the fact that Uganda is embracing social protection. When it comes to the specific policy relating to social protection, it is the Uganda National Social Protection Policy of 2015. But when you look at this law, nowhere does it mention anyone that is termed as a refugee or an asylum seeker. this depicts that it only references to nationals. When you look at the pandemic that I was going to say that just happened, but it's still ongoing, it is something that has affected each and every one, not just nationals, but everyone. One would expect that whichever support that is going to be extended would be extended on a humanitarian basis, on a needs basis, and not on a nationalistic basis. When you look at, that goes on to the different programs as well. When you look at the top 5 challenges faced by urban refugees, there is, I used that animation to depict that they are interconnected one way or another. When you see language barrier, if you can't speak the language of the community you are operating in, you cannot trade. If you cannot trade, you cannot earn a living. If you cannot earn a living, you cannot pay for bills. So language barrier at the center of it affects all these others, or is connected to all those others. Then we have the element of discrimination. One would say this is everywhere, but it is specific to the Somali refugees in Uganda. Sometime in 2011, Uganda was bombed by the Al-Shabaab. And since then, most of the Somali refugees are referred to as rebels, terrorists. You're the ones who bomb us. So there is that kind of stigma and discrimination. And this has nothing to even do with COVID, but it is going to affect their stay in a location, in getting recognized as human beings, not even just refugees, human beings. Getting access to social amenities will be affected because they're going to be excluded. Then we have the fact that there is ignorance by some state and non-state actors about refugee protection. Refugees that are in Kampala, when you interview and you talk to some of them, they'll say, well, when I came, I went to the area local council and he says, who is a refugee? I thought those people only stay in the villages. Okay, you're in Kampala, that means you're on your own. You people are rich, you have the UN funding you. So the fact that there is the element of UN backing, there is the presumption that they are rich. They can access each and every need that they can want, which is not the truth, because UNHCR itself tries to limit refugees coming to the cities. What they do is they recognize what we call the urban caseload. You only are recognized by UNHCR if you've been referred by the settlement commandant from the camp area on a medical basis. If you are in the city to try to find a better environment for you to employ your skills, you are on your own. So to this extent, majority of the refugees in Kampala live in the poor suburbs. They are either homeless, or if they have, something that looks like a home, it's overcrowded. So when COVID came in and we were requiring things like social distancing, sanitation, most of these could not be afforded. When you look at the impacts of COVID, a World Food Program report said that about half of a sampled population of 212 refugees in Kampala lost over 75% household income. The proportion of household income without an income earner increased from 31% before the pandemic to 72% at the time of the survey. This shows that we were jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Worse still, when the government tried to extend some social support or social assistance, refugees were excluded. If you are supposed to get food relief, the government said you need to depict your national ID to whoever is going to hand over these parcels. So refugees could not benefit from that. When it came to cash transfers, they required, again, the national ID number. And to this extent, refugees were excluded. But were they excluded from the pandemic? No. So to this extent, I would make this point that as countries that are hosting refugees, perhaps while they may not be enshrined in our social policies and regulations, can we distinguish between social assistance that is naturally given to citizens and also emergency assistance that is given in such a time like COVID? Because it's not segregating anyone, it's affecting each and everyone. And one may say that you are as safe as your neighbor. If your neighbor is not safe, you are equally not safe. So the business of only focusing on the nationals is not progressive. Majority of the refugees in the urban center, if they're lucky to find employment, it's going to be in the informal sector. And it has been said since yesterday, one of the sectors that has been hit by the pandemic, as well as the response mechanisms government have used, has been the informal sector. They've been shut down. Majority are not considered essential. So you find that there is a high rate of unemployment that has resulted from that. So when you look at what's been shared thus far, they are not included in the policies. They are only considered for nationals, the policies that have been provided. You realize that there is no equity. The policies, that these are the social protection policies, what it tries to advance. Non-discrimination, there is clear-cut discrimination in extending of any kind of aid. Transparency and accountability, I would say there is zero as far as refugees are concerned. When you look at the fact that I'll give the case of Adjumani, this is one of the districts that hosts refugees. The population of refugees there as of 31st August 2021 was 230,140. While that of the host community was 237,400, with a difference of 7,200. So they are almost balancing. Adjumani hosts I would call it the oldest refugees in Uganda. Refugees have been in Uganda since the Second World War. We started hosting the Polish refugees. And you would think that since we've been handling refugees, for lack of a better word, we would cease to see it as a factor that happens suddenly. The ministry that relates with refugees is called Disaster Management and Preparation. But we've been handling this for over 50 years. Can't we move forward and start planning for refugees within the national system? Because it's not something that happens suddenly. When you look at our neighbors, they are plunged into civil wars. So you expect when there is instability in your neighboring countries, it's going to cause an outpouring into your country, a number of persons. So maybe to go to the recommendations, if we could extend or adjust the existing programs and policies to the informal sector. The social protection as highlighted in the different laws is good, but it excludes the refugees. When they are working, whether it's formal or informal, when it's formal, they pay taxes because it is allowed to work. Informal, they still make some contributions to the economy. They should as well also expect some form of support from the government through social protection. When you look at, I mentioned earlier that when they look at urban refugees, they only consider those in the city center. But we have more that are living in the 12 refugee hosting districts, but are not in the settlement. They are in those respective cities, but they are not counted. So can we have the UNHCR and OPM profile, register, and document urban refugees beyond Kampala? There is this lacuna. The Refugee Act will provide for the right to work, but then you need a work permit. It's expensive. And OPM will say, well, we waived that. Refugees do not need the work permit. You go to internal affairs, they'll say, well, we don't know about OPM, what it is saying. For us, we follow a different law and you need a work permit. So when you ask most of the urban refugees, what do you think? Say, I don't know. I don't know if I need a work permit. I think I need a work permit. So there is no clear law or policy that is clear cut to depict whether one needs a work permit or not. And to this extent, it affects the livelihood of quite a number who do not venture into getting jobs. Then if we could increase access to credit and loans to the migrants, to the refugees in particular, when most of the refugees, urban refugees, try to get assistance, there is that requirement of permanent place of abode. And they'll say, well, I'm a refugee. That means you're going back anytime soon, so you have no permanent place of abode. They're automatically denied any kind of access to credit. And how is someone supposed to establish themselves without any kind of support? So if we could also increase their access to credit and loans, it would help them develop themselves. Then create, protect, and make accessible workplaces that provide livelihood to low-income groups like public markets. Because of discrimination, access to public markets has been difficult for refugees generally. When they go to rent a stall, it's hiked with the presumption of you'll have the backing of the UN, so you're rich. If it's accommodation, it's hiked. You have the backing of these different organizations, whereas what is on ground is actually not that. Then can we include refugees in national responses and other crises? It's no longer something that happens suddenly. We've seen it happening, it is happening, it has been happening for the last 50 years. So can we treat it as something that we know is going to happen and not react to it as an afterthought? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, ladies, for that. Can I have assistance so that we now give them the mics so that they may respond faster to any issues that may come up. I've got some issues that we may discuss with them here. I do not know if, because for the sake of time, I'd rather have matters coming from you guys than the ones that I have with them. So if there are any, quickly show by the raising of your hands. I've got 1, 2, all right. Online, I haven't seen any hand coming up. So I think they are good to go. They have sorted us up here. Let me have you, Isaac, coming up. So what we do with our questions, because we want to stick to the next 10 minutes and we be done, try as much as is possible to be straight to the point. Thanks. And may you be sanitizing this one because it will be used soon.
Okay, thank you to our presenters. All the presentations went well. I have a question for each one of you. Grace, what I wanted to find out from you is, are you saying that the exclusion of returnees on social protection in Uganda? Unfortunately, I can't explain my question because of time, but I hope you get what I'm trying to get to, because even your topic says that you return to poverty. There is an assumption there. So if you can explain that. Danita, so in terms of access by the migrants, did they indicate in terms of the requirements, did they meet the requirements of what is needed when they apply? And if they do, or if they don't, what are the challenges that they are facing? It is depending on their situation. Kalitani, you mentioned that social protection in Uganda is constitutional, if I got you correct. And I would like to know more about whether people in Uganda or the poor, the vulnerable in Uganda are really make claims to the government. Are you also making a claim that it is Uganda is now using a rights-based approach to social protection? And if it is true, then to what extent is that, but I have another question for you, which is that, are you advocating for social protection for refugees outside the camp that you were talking about? Because you say when they're outside camps, then they are on their own. So what is it that you are advocating for it? How is that applicable in the context of the laws that apply in Uganda? Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Isaac, for that. Marius, if you can come through.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I had other SASPEN business to attend to in between. I couldn't listen to all of the presentation. But let me start with the last one, Uganda's position under the international commitments. Uganda has ratified both the, what do you call it, the UN Convention and Protocol, as well as the OAU one. And I think you need to be guided in the first place by the obligations of Uganda under those instruments in terms of employment and social protection. The relevant articles are 17, 18, and 19 for employment purposes, self-employment, non-self-employment, and then also professionals working, and 24 for social protection, not 23 as I said earlier. And the general rule there is that refugees, those who are officially recognized as refugees, the same entitlements available to Ugandans should be extended to them in terms of the UN protocol. I mean, that is the least of the international obligations. The only exception to this is a declaration that Uganda made under Article 17, which is the one dealing with, I think it might be self-employment, where Uganda said that to the extent that Uganda has entered or may enter into an arrangement within the East African community, special arrangements, as you know, the liberalization of movement in the EAC. To the extent that there are special arrangements for EAC citizens, those specifically will not be made applicable to refugees in Uganda. That's only in relation to Article 17. Doesn't affect social protection, social security. In other words, Uganda did not make a reservation or a declaration in respect of it. So my suggestion to you is that the first port of call for addressing this issue is to take Uganda back to its international obligations. And then secondly, our colleague in the middle who's, sorry, I forgot your name, who spoke about, I think you started off by looking at the South African case, and you mentioned the Refugee Amendment Act of 2017. I'm not sure whether it's relevant to what I'm going to tell you now, but there has been some recent work done on the social security implications of the Refugee Amendment Act. There's an excellent article by Ziegler, foreigner who did some research here, and there's last week at the 9th ELERA African Congress, there was a paper presented on this very issue. But you can come and talk to me afterwards if you're interested in that. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Marius, for that. So my colleagues here, I'll have 5 minutes, in which I'll take 1 minute. So what were Marius' comments? You may want to speak to them, but be briefly, because I saw that there are comments that you may want to take on board. We have mostly those questions you may need to address. Address them in such a manner that you address them within one question and also say your concluding remarks. Should that be okay? So we will reverse the order. We had started with Grace in our presentation. Now we will start with Kalitani, then come to Danita, and then I end with you, Grace, in that order.
Thank you very much. Starting with the Constitution and the social protection in Uganda. The 1995 Constitution does provide for the protection and promotion of the fundamental human rights, including social protection, but that is on paper. Practice, debatable. We have laws that have been also established that depicts that we are progressing to achieving social protection. The pensions, the NSSF, there are several that also depict that there is some kind of protection, but largely we are still lagging behind in implementation. Relating to what I am advocating for, the urban refugee. he seems to be forgotten. He has been left to maneuver on his own. The refugee in the settlement has several persons trying to tend to him or her, but the person, the refugee in the city center, is forgotten largely. So he is the one I'm advocating for any kind of support to be extended to him as well and not be discriminated on the basis of his location or his decision to move to the city center as his place of abode. Not sure if that quite answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. We can take the conversation even outside in the event that we have follow-ups. So thanks for that, Kalitani. Danita.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Isaac, for your question. So yes, the participants in my study, they were all eligible for the CSGs and they meet the requirements. However, it's the systemic challenges that prevent them from sometimes receiving the CSGs for their children. Mainly, they talk about long queues at the SASSA offices when they have to reapply for the grant, and this actually causes delays. And then there are things like language barriers as well. The ladies speak Swahili and French, and some of them, they don't even speak Zulu, which is, the most popular language in Durban. So because of that, sometimes there's discrimination because it's like, oh, you can't speak Zulu, come again, or get someone who can translate on your behalf. So those are like the systemic challenges that hinder their access to the CSGs.
Thanks so much for that. Grace.
Thank you for your comment. In terms of the exclusion of the returning migrants in our laws, when you look at our parent law, the Citizenship and Immigration Act, it deals with one part of migration, which is those ones entering in to regulate who comes in, the giving you of the citizenship. But once you leave the country, there is no legal backing. Therefore, you're left to your own wishes. I can take here an example. I left Uganda in 2003 and I came to study in South Africa after I got a worker's permit. I lived here. The embassy only knew of my existence here when my visa was ending, when I went to renew it. So that issue of lack of control of where they are, I've even given Yapa as an example. It happens for the people who are born to seek for employment. It means they are not protected. I was at the mercy of whoever was employing me.
Right. Thanks so much. So without a shadow of a doubt, if we are to leave no one behind, definitely we need to also address this aspect of marginalized groups. And I think you guys here have made that case. Thank you so much. And thanks for making my work easier. You are sticking to time. If I just indicate that we're running out of time, you speed up. Thanks for that. And may you help me thank them by clapping for them. Let me then give back to our organizers. I'm sure maybe if there are no announcements, it should be our lunch time. We've tried to, oh, it's not yet. Oh, so we have one. Oh, that's Taku. I was seeing that you are coming at 13:30. Do you see that? So it's a typo. Oh. All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's another announcement, important one for the AP members, the advisory panel members who included, then also includes the other two governance structures, the Board of Trustees and the Board of Directors. There is an extension of our meeting that we had on Monday. It will be a short meeting directly after the